thalamus, it is a egg-shaped mass of gray matter lies in upper part of the lateral wall of the third ventricle of the brain. So what is the thalamus? Egg-shaped mass of the gray matter, and it lies in the upper part of the lateral wall of the third ventricle of the brain. So we have this is the frontal section. Frontal section is like this way, and this is the cerebral cortex, and this is the lateral ventricle, and here you'll find the third ventricle, and this is the thalamus, and these structures are basal ganglia, caudate, putamen, globus pallidus, external, internal, and this is the thalamus, and this is the lateral ventricle, and this is the third ventricle. Here we find we have the internal cavity. So these are the important structures in this section. That is the frontal section. So here you find the thalamus. This is the third ventricle. So thalamus is a diencephalon. Developmentally, you will find that diencephalon, they form the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Here you can see diencephalon. This is going to form the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus. And telencephalon, it is going to form the basal ganglia. So we have discussed it today. So thalamus will find the major sensory relation, all the general spatial sensation except the smell, then afferent impulses from the reticular activating system, they relay here in the thalamus. So here you find these are the one kind of the sensation, fine touch, proprioception, vibration, they go. It's the first neuron, and we have the second neuron, and second neuron they relay in the thalamus. So this is the thalamus, and from here you'll find it will go to the primary somatosensory area of the cerebral cortex. That is area 312. As far as the classification of the thalamus is concerned, we can classify the various thalamic nuclei by different factors, like the neuroanatomical, structurally. So structurally, we can divide thalamic nuclei into three divisions or three groups: lateral group, medial group, anterior group. So as far as the neuroanatomical classification is concerned, all the thalamic nuclei can be divided into lateral group, medial group, and the anterior group. So on the basis of anatomy, all the thalamic nuclei can be divided into lateral, medial, and anterior. So this is the thalamus, this left one, right one, and this is the cerebellum, and here we find the hypothalamus. So how we can divide this structurally? The thalamus is composed of the gray matter. You'll find the gray matter, or this is all gray matter, and we have the medullary lamina. So this is the sheath of the white matter. This is known as the medullary lamina. We have the external medullary lamina. This is the external medullary lamina, and this Y shape is the internal medullary lamina. So this external medullary lamina separate reticular nucleus. This is a reticular nucleus. It separates the reticular nucleus from the rest of the thalamic nucleus. So this is the rest of the thalamic nucleus, and this is the reticular. This external medullary lamina contains thalamocortical and the corticothalamic fiber. The fiber which are going from the thalamus to the cortex, and from cortex to the thalamus. This is the Y-shaped. This is known as the internal medullary lamina, Y-shaped. Divide the thalamus into anterior. This is the anterior, then medial, and the lateral. And here in the internal medullary lamina, you'll find a fiber connecting the thalamic nuclei with one another. So you'll find this is connected to this and this. So they lies in the internal medullary lamina. Inside this lamina, you'll find the intralaminar nuclei. So inside this internal medullary lamina, you'll also find some gray matter. So many clusters, so many nuclei are there here, and these nuclei are referred as the intralaminar nuclei. So we have classified lateral, medial, and anterior. So now there is a further classification of the lateral. So lateral are further divided into dorsal and the ventral group of the nuclei. So initially we had divided lateral, anterior, and medial. So this lateral one is further divided into dorsal and ventral. And now this ventral is further divided into ventral anterior, ventral posterior, ventral lateral, then medial geniculate body, and the lateral geniculate body. So basically this is the ventral group of the nuclei. This is the part of the lateral group of the thalamic nuclear mass. So you'll find this is the internal medullary lamina, and in the internal medullary lamina you have the intralaminar nuclei. This is the anterior nuclei, this part is the medial nuclei, and this whole part is the lateral. And lateral one is further divided into ventral and the dorsal, and ventral is further divided into ventral anterior, ventrolateral, ventroposterior. Posterior we have ventroposterior lateral and ventroposterior medial. We also have lateral geniculate body and medial geniculate body. And in this diagram, we'll show the reticular nuclei. We will find external medullary lamina lies here. The dorsal group of the nuclei. So lateral one is divided into two, ventral and dorsal. So dorsal one, we have the pulvinar, we have lateral dorsal and lateral posterior. So this is the pulvinar, This is the lateral dorsal. This is the lateral posterior. So this lies posterior, so known as lateral posterior, and this is lateral dorsal. This is the pulvinar. So this group is the dorsal. This group is the ventral. This is anterior, and this is the medial. Then we have the medial group. The medial group, we have centromedial nucleus, dorsomedial nucleus, midline nucleus. So we have started like this way that all the thalamic nucleus, we can take the help of this. So all the thalamic nucleus can be divided into anterior, medial, and lateral. Lateral are further divided into ventral and dorsal. Ventral are further divided into ventro-anterior, ventrolateral, ventro-posterior. Ventro-posterior are further divided into ventro-posterior lateral and ventro-posterior medial. Lateral geniculate body and medial geniculate body. Dorsal one, we have the laterodorsal and lateroposterior and the pulvinar. While the medial, we have the centromedial nucleus, dorsomedial nucleus, and midline nucleus. So these are the nucleus you'll find in the medial group, and you'll find the anterior one is lying here. Now we can classify on the basis of the development. Till now we have classified the various thalamic nuclei on the basis of anatomy, structure. Now, how these nuclei have developed, on the basis of development, we can classify the various thalamic nucleus as dorsal thalamus, ventral thalamus, and the epithalamus. Dorsal one, they have the connection with the extrathalamic sources. So we have the extrinsic nuclei. We also have the intrinsic nuclei. So they have the connection with the other thalamic nuclei. So they make the connection with the extrathalamic nuclei or the cortical relay nuclei. And the intrinsic one, they make the connection with the other intrathalamic nuclei. Dorsal one, extrinsic one, we have posterior ventral, ventrolateral, anterior, medial geniculate body, lateral geniculate body. These together, they are known as the metathalamus. We have the medial and the lateral. So that is on the basis of the development, extrinsic. Then we have the intrinsic one, and here we find the midline nucleus, interlaminar nucleus. In the interlaminar nucleus, we have so many nuclei: centrum medianum, also known as the centrum medium, parafascicular nucleus, then limitans nucleus, central nucleus, paracentral nucleus, then central lateral nucleus. So till now we have discussed the ventral, or till now we have discussed the dorsal one. So this is the ventral one, and this is the epithalamus. So epithalamus have the connection with the olfactory system, like the pineal body, heavy nuclear complex. So we have the functional classification. So till now we have discussed two classification. One is the anatomy, then second on the basis of development, and third one is the functional classification. So this functional classification are further divided into non-specific projection nuclei and the specific projection nuclei. Uh, by saying that specific projection nuclei, they are projecting specific area, and non-specific projection nuclei, they are projecting to non-specific area. So there is a difference in between these two. So what is the difference? Specific nuclei, they lie within the ventral group of the lateral nuclear mass. So this whole of the ventral group of the lateral nuclei, where we find the ventro-anterior, ventrolateral, ventro-posterior, this whole nuclei, then medial and lateral geniculate body. So these are the specific nuclei, and rest of the nuclei are non-specific, as we have only two options. So non-specific, we have the nuclei of the dorsal gyre, of the lateral group, and whole of the anterior and the medial. Specific one have well-defined sensory and motor function, have highly organized point-to-point connection with sensory and motor region of the cerebral cortex. So basically in sensory, they have well-defined sensory and the motor system function because they are projected to a specific area. And they also have the point-to-point connection with sensory and the motor region of the cerebral cortex. While the non-specific nuclei, they have less functionally distinct afferent input, connect with the wide area of the cortex, including the associate and limbic system. So basically, they are having the well-defined function, and they have point-to-point connection with the cerebral cortex. While here, they are less functionally distinct, and they are projecting to wide area of the cortex. Here they are projecting to a specific area, but here they are projecting to wider area of the limbic uh, limbic region of the cortex. So we have various nucleus. So first of all, we'll discuss the non-specific one. So we have till now we have discussed the neuroanatomical classification. On the basis of the neuroanatomical classification, we have described the various thalamic nucleus into three categories: lateral, medial, and anterior. And on the basis of the functional, we have classified various thalamic nucleus into two: non-specific and the specific one. So now we are discussing the individual important thalamic nuclei. First, we want to discuss the non-specific ones, which are not projecting specific area. So first is the midline thalamic nuclei. I hope you know the location. This is a midline thalamic nuclei. So the efferent come from spinothalamic, trigeminothalamic tract, medial lemniscus, lateral this reticular formation, and other thalamic nucleus. Hypothalamus. The efferent go to hypothalamus, neocortex, and basal ganglia. And the function is they are concerned with the crude, visceral, and somatic sensation. So midline nuclei, they are important for the crude, visceral, and somatic sensation. And you'll notice that so many sensations they are coming from the spinal cord, from so many area, and they are projecting to cortex, basal ganglia, and hypothalamus. So at least you should remember the function of the midline nucleus. That is a crude. They are concerned with the crude, visceral, and somatic sensation. Then we have the next nuclei is the intralaminar nuclei. Intralaminar nuclei, what will happen within this internal medullary lamina? You'll find so many nuclei are there. So these are referred as a intralaminar nuclei because they lies in the lamina, internal medullary lamina. So what the function of this intralaminar nuclei? The afferent come from reticular activating system, basal ganglia, other thalamic nuclei. Different go to prefrontal cortex, and they are integrating the somatic and the visceral sensory impulses, and they are important for the alerting effect of the reticular activating system. Then next is the dorsomedial nucleus. So dorsomedial nucleus you'll find this lies here, dorsomedial nucleus. The dorsomedial nucleus afferent come from hypothalamic nuclei, prefrontal cortex, and projecting to prefrontal cortex, area 8, 9, 10, 11. And they are concerned with the crude somatic sensation. So you can notice here they are projected to a wide area, not a small area, but a wide area. Hence, midline nucleus, interlaminar nucleus, and the dorsomedial nucleus, they are referred as a non-specific projection nucleus. So after that, we are coming to the specific projection nuclei. The first one is the anterior one, the anterior nuclei, and it will come from the afferent come from mammillary body, and mammillary body is the part of the hypothalamus. The tract is known as a mammillothalamic tract. The different go to cingulate gyrus, and they are the part of the Papez circuit. And this circuit is important for the recent memory and emotion. So this is the anterior group of the nucleus. If you see, this is the anterior group, which is a quite big nuclei. So what is the Papez circuit? So this is the a circuit is there. If we start from hippocampus, so there's a hippocampus and dentate gyrus. There's a hippocampal formation. There's a fornix. The information is coming to mammillary body, hypothalamic nuclei, and then it will go to the thalamus, anterior thalamic nuclei, and this tract is known as the mammillothalamic tract. And from there, it will go to the cortex of the cingulate gyrus. Then it goes to the parahippocampal gyrus. Then it will return back to the hippocampal formation. So it is some kind of the circuit is there. This is known as the Papez circuit, and this circuit is important for the recent memory and emotion. So in this diagram, you can see this is the memory body, and this is the anterior thalamic nucleus, and this is the cingulate gyrus. We'll discuss the Papez circuit again in the limbic system next week. So the next nucleus is the lateral ventral nucleus. The afferent comes from dentate to thalamic tract, globus, pallidus. Different will go to the premotor area 4 and 6. And the function wise, they are concerned with the proprioceptive information, and they are also important for the voluntary motor function. So this is the ventrolateral nucleus. We have the posterior ventral nucleus. Ventral-posterior nucleus. So afferent comes from spinothalamic tract, medial lemniscus, and trigeminal and medial lemniscus, base and taste fiber are there. And it will go to the sensory cortex, area 3, 1, 2. Then we have the somatosensory impulses, and the sensory impulses coming from the face. Then dorsolateral nucleus, afferent come from other thalamic nucleus, parietal lobe, cerebral cortex, and going to the cerebral cortex, parietal lobe, and they are concerned with the language. The next is the pulvinar. Pulvinar is an important structure. The afferent comes from thalamic nucleus, cerebral cortex, parietal lobe, temporal, occipital lobe, and the efferent will go to the cerebral cortex, parietal lobe, temporal, occipital lobe, and they are integrating the auditory, visual, and somatic information. So this pulvinar is a structure. Here you can see this pulvinar. So this structure is connected with the various association area in the cortex, and as it is connected with the various association area, so it is integrating the auditory, visual, and somatic information. The next is the medial geniculate body. Afferent comes from the auditory fiber from cochlear nucleus and inferior colliculi. Efferent will go to the auditory cortex, and they are concerned with the hearing. Lateral geniculate body, it is concerned the afferent is coming from the optic tract. Efferent go to the ipsilateral calcarine cortex by geniculo-calcarine tract, and they are concerned with the vision. So if you see the cortex, you'll find dorsomedial nucleus is concerned here, and ventro-anterior is here, ventrolateral is concerned with this, ventrolateral posterior, this with the medial geniculate body, the lateral geniculate body is there, and this is the lateral posterior, and this is the pulvinar. So what is the function of the thalamus? So it is a great sensory relaxation. So somatic sensation are there. You find various somatic sensation. They comes to relay in the thalamus from the opposite half, except the olfactory. So there is a thalamic radiation projecting fiber, thalamocortical system are there, and so many sensation they relay here. So because of this, it is also referred as a head ganglion of all the sensory system. So it is a great sensory relaxation. You'll find the major station for integration and modification of sensory impulses. Then processing of sensory information is there. So what happens in the thalamus? So there's an integration, some kind of a modification, some kind of the processing of the sensory information occur in the thalamus. So it is referred as a functional gateway of the cerebral cortex. It is also a great sensory relaxation and root center for perception of the sensation. You'll find The sensation are perceived by either by the cerebral cortex or by the thalamus. So cerebral cortex sensation are perceived. Cerebral cortex is important for the discriminative nature of the sensation. Say by the help of the cerebral cortex, you are able to know the type, location, and the other detail of the sensation. Where is the sensation in upper extremity or in the lower extremity? Which type of the sensation is there? It is a pain, touch, vibration. So this thing is done by the cerebral cortex. So how it is different from the thalamus? Thalamus is just have the give the affective nature. It will simply tell whether this sensation is pleasant or unpleasant, whether it is agreeable or disagreeable. So there is a difference. Cerebral cortex is a wide area, and this thing is important for the discrimination of the various kind of the sensation. While thalamus is important for the affective nature. By saying the affective nature means whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, whether it is agreeable or disagreeable. The thalamus is also important for the subcortical perception of the sensation, like the pain. The pain can be perceived by the thalamus also, but this perception is different from the cortical perception. Then thalamus is also connected with the thalamus. Thalamus is also connected with the cerebellum, opposite side. Then thalamus also lie between the basal ganglia and the cortical motor area. And this thing is important for the integration of the motor function or muscle tone. Then thalamus is also important for the reticular formation, wakefulness, alertness. It is also important for the auditory and the visual pathway. It is also important for the autonomic and the emotional reactions, as it is connected with the hypothalamus and the limbic system. It also has the integrating center for the sleep. If you stimulate the thalamus lateral to vasa media, it induces a sleep. Then it is also a part of the Papez circuit, which is concerned with the recent memory and emotion. Then thalamus is also important for the language speech function. It is the integrating between the different cortical part of the subcortical connection in the thalamus. Then thalamus is also important for the genesis of synchronization of the EEG. The thalamus is also important for the integration of visceral and somatic function, as it is connected with the hypothalamus. So till now we have discussed the various thalamic nuclei. So now we are coming to one syndrome, which is known as the thalamic syndrome. So what will happen if there is a blockage of thalamo-geniculate branch of posterior cerebral artery? So we have posterior cerebral artery, and if there is a blockage of posterior cerebral artery, then you'll find there is a blockage of thalamo-geniculate branch, then it will damage the posterior ventral and the posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus. So as there is a blockage, it may be because of the clot or some other reasons. So as the blood supply is decreased, so because of this fact, you find there is a damage of the posterior ventral nucleus and the posterior lateral of the thalamus. D. Jarin and Rousey, these are the scientists who describe the thalamic syndrome. So this thalamic syndrome is also known as the D. Jarin-Rousey syndrome. This is the posterior cerebral artery, and there is a branch, thalamo-geniculate branch, which is supplying the thalamus. Sign and symptom appear in the opposite side. If there is a lesion in the posterior ventral nucleus, so what will happen? Normally, sensation are coming from skin, muscle, taste, afferent, post-central cortex. They are coming, and there is a loss of tactile localization, tactile discrimination, and there is a loss of stygnosis, and it is known as the astygnosis. So, what the meaning of this stygnosis? Stygnosis is the ability to recognize familiar objects by handling them without looking at them. So, if you ask your friend to close his eye tightly, and if you keep something, familiar thing in his hand, so by locating that hand only, he can tell it is a coin or pen, whatever the familiar object is there. And the loss of the stygnosis is known as the astygnosis. And this thing occurs when there is a damage to the parietal lobe. This ventro-posterior nucleus is also known as the uh, ventro-posterior nucleus. So there is a loss of kinesthetic sensation also, and as there is a loss of kinesthetic sensation, it is known as the thalamic phantom limb. So there is an illusion that limb is absent. Why such illusion is there? Because the sensation are not coming to your brain, and this thing is known as the amyloidognosis, and this thing is also known as the thalamic phantom limb. And as there is a loss of this nucleus, there is a loss of kinesthetic sensation, and because of this, there is a thalamic phantom limb is there. But there is a overreaction occur to the painful stimuli. While in the case of the posterior lateral nucleus, uh, which carry the cerebellar impulses to the motor cortex 4 and 6, there is a profound muscular weakness, there is a decrease in the muscle tone, there is a ataxia, there is an incoordination of the muscle movement in terms of rate, range, force, direction, and time. So there is a ataxia is there because impulses are coming from the cerebellar and they are going to the motor cortex. So there is a decrease in the muscle tone. There are also intention tremor. There is a thalamic or ethetoid hand. So what is the ethetoid or the thalamic hand? There is a flexion of wrist with the hyperextended finger. So there is a flexion of wrist and hyperextended finger are there. The fiber which are coming from the globus pallidus, they are being affected, and there is a chorioacetosis is there. So this thing is there, thalamic hand, which is an abnormal posture, forearm pronated, wrist flexed, metacarpophalangeal joint extended, interphalangeal joint extended. So this is the thalamic hand. So with this, thank you very much. I complete thalamus output. So with this, I end this webinar now. If you have any question, you can send me on my email. If you think anything should be repeated, it is not clear, so I will repeat again. But I hope in the exam you will do better and score very good marks. So thank you very much. I end the webinar now.